What's up, users? It's the Russian dude. Today we have another guest for our Thank God It's Monday podcast, Paul Warburg. So he has the obviously YouTube channel name with the exactly same name, and then he has the Icarus project. I'm sure he'll be able to tell more about those things as he speaks. But as for now, thank you, Paul, so much for accepting this invitation. Thank you for appearing as a guest on the podcast, and I'm assuming some of our guests never heard about you. So can you please tell a couple of words about yourself and introduce what you do here on YouTube?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So what I do on YouTube these days is geopolitical analysis, which mostly means coverage of obviously Russia's war against Ukraine. Sometimes I'll cover other topics when it comes to economics, like tariffs and things like that, or also maybe things going on in the Middle East, but really focused on the war in Ukraine. And the way I kind of got into that, so I'm actually a pastor, so this isn't quite especially where my training area was. But as a pastor, I learned in school, a lot of history, a little bit of geopolitics when it comes to missions and things like that. But where my interest really came in was I had a cousin who actually volunteered to go fight for Ukraine. He was an American soldier, and he ended up losing his life over there. He was targeted by the Russian military. They hunted him down with a drone and dropped a chemical weapon on his platoon. And he kind of took that out to save the rest of the guys' lives. And so kind of following, his journey is what really led me to become a lot more passionate about the war in Ukraine and making a lot more content. And so it's a lot of fun. Sometimes it's discouraging, sometimes it's encouraging, but I love making videos on this topic.
Well, first of all, I would like to, I guess, from every single one of us, thank your cousin for the sacrifice he made. Unfortunately, on my side, we also have losses both from Russia and from Ukraine, so I know how it feels. But yeah, from the entire Russian dude community, we thank you, cousin, for sacrifice, and we know that this did help the platoon people, guys, other soldiers that followed him, so he was able to make our lives, other soldiers' lives better, other lives easier, and maybe he even saved some lives. So for this, thanks so much.
Yeah, we're proud of him.
Yes, now we are. The Russian community is proud of him as well. So then I guess, once again, I mentioned in the very introduction, you also have two channels besides Paul Warburg. You also have another channel, the Icarus project. What is this project is about? Is there similar type of content are you making?
Yeah, it's similar content. So these days, kind of what I do is I do a lot of research, and I make videos for the Paul Warburg channel. And for videos that do particularly well, we try to kind of make those again on the Icarus project, just because it's a different format. It's a little more heavily scripted. I can bring in animations, show things on the map and things like that, and also kind of smooth out some rough edges just to make the content a little better and hopefully reach either a broader or at least a different audience to kind of just help get the message out. So it's two different formats that I use to share my research on Russia and Ukraine primarily.
I'll definitely include links to both of these channels. I mean, that's how I pretty much found you, how I got inspiration for these interviews, some of the questions. All these links to both channels will be down below. You're doing pretty good, especially by the way on Paul Warburg, just like 100 videos, and you're able to cross 150,000, 180,000 subscribers, I think. So you are talking the very right things if people are watching you. So keep doing what you're doing. Thank you for this. One of the videos, by the way, in Icarus project YouTube channel, what I saw, which was like, okay, I definitely want to ask this question. The video was titled Russia's insane plan to take over Belarus. I'm assuming most of our viewers have not seen this video. So can you please summarize it for us?
Yeah, that's an older video. So I'm going to have to refresh my memory a little bit, but essentially a couple of years back, early on in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there were documents that came out that essentially said Russia had a plan to fully annex Belarus at some point. Maybe that's changed as the war has progressed because it's gone very poorly for Russia. But their plan was very similar to, for example, what they've done in Georgia and in Ukraine, where they were trying to kind of Russify citizens, pass out Russian passports and things like that. And there were leaked documents from within the Russian government that actually said at some point that they wanted to fully kind of incorporate Belarus into Russian territory. A lot of people know that Belarus is a Russian ally at the moment. You have Lukashenko, who's very pro-Russian. Conceivably, though, if he were ever to come out of power or kind of not toe the Kremlin party line, they might actually want to get a hold of Belarusian territory for themselves. And there's a lot of interesting elements to this, like early on in the war, where there were actually some false flag attacks where Russian soldiers like fired on Belarusian territory Belarusian territory to try to get them to, I think probably to provoke them into the war, or at least to try. And there were also incidents where, Russian tanks went into combat flying the Belarusian flag. And so there are a lot of interesting things. Haven't talked about it in a while. It's a topic actually I'd love to revisit and do some updated research on, but super fascinating to think about.
So then I know everything what you're just going to say is going to be the assumption, especially because you need to refresh the topic in your mind, same as pretty much everyone's mind, because I don't remember myself personally talking about Belarus for so long. But do you think something like this is going to happen? Do you think Putin, Lukashenko, either cooperatingly or without cooperations, start some, once again, incursions, false flag operations into each other to provoke maybe each other, or maybe Russians will try to make it look like it's Ukrainians to put Belarus into war on Russia's side or against each other? In the end, do you think this is going to continue? Do you think it's going to happen again? Some tension maybe between Russia and Belarus, or that's it, they're just friends, or passive friends, active friends, and nothing ever is going to happen again?
It's hard to say. I think, when you look at Russia and how the war in Ukraine has gone for them, it has cost them a whole lot more than I think Russia was planning. And so for them to have the strength to actually do something like this seems pretty unlikely at the moment, but there's a couple things that could make it happen. When we look at Belarus, for example, they made some recent decisions to release some high profile prisoners to the United States. I don't think Putin was too happy about that. That in and of itself was not a big enough deal, but to cause Russia to attack Belarus or do anything to them. But it does show a rift that could grow. Lukashenko might be having second thoughts about his partnership with Putin, seeing how this war has progressed. And so if that rift grows, and for example, Russia wants to continue expansion into Europe, but they don't think that they can actually take a NATO country on, it's not inconceivable that they might actually look to Belarus as a future target. And they could easily, level propaganda against them and say that, Belarus had betrayed Russia, and they already have enough ammunition to, in the Russian world, to create a propaganda campaign around that, especially if they wanted to lean into that. So do I think it's going to happen? I don't see any signs of that currently, but I would not be surprised if there were developments in that direction.
So definitely the cooperation between Putin and Lukashenko right now is not what it used to be, especially as it was in the beginning of the war. It almost felt like they were visiting each other's countries like almost bi-weekly. Lukashenko was talking about this is where the incursion into Belarus was planning from, showing the map, blah, blah, blah. Putin was in Belarus, Lukashenko was in Russia, Kremlin, like once again, almost every other week. Now, I don't personally even remember the last time they met. So what do you think is the relationship between the presidents of those countries right now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, all you say, it's not good. At least not as good as it was. I think Lukashenko has put himself in a very difficult position, and to hold on to power, he probably wants to disassociate from Russia as much as possible, because what do we see Russia doing? It's actually trying to kind of pull on the resources of all its partner countries. We see Russia trying to pull North Korean troops into the war. Lukashenko is probably quite worried. The Belarusian military is not very large. He's probably quite worried if Putin would try to kind of force Belarus to become part of the war, which is something he did early on in the war, and Lukashenko kind of resisted it at that point. And so I'm not surprised to see Lukashenko kind of pulling back from Putin a little bit, because his own power is very precarious if Putin pushes on him, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm assuming this could be one of the best representations what it means to be Putin's friend, because Lukashenko, among other countries, what we see right now, I don't think, by the way, Lukashenko was even invited to the most recent victory day parade in Moscow, which was, by the way, surprising. I'm just thinking about it because, Lukashenko was one of the earliest all-time friends of Putin, and now, you don't see any cooperation at all, which can be a sign for current nowadays so-called friends of Putin that this is where this friendship with this person leads to, because eventually he's gonna take advantage of you, use you as much as possible, and then just, okay, what's up? That's it. You're on your own. Thank you for the help, or not even thanks. Nothing like this. You did also mention about pooling the resources, which speaking by once about the resources, and speaking about now another ally, supposed, of Russia and Putin, China. Why do you think we don't see that much involvement of China in Russia's war? I mean, there is no troops, there is not much, at least, equipment. Sometimes there was like Chinese golf carts, Chinese bikes were spotted on the front lines. But if there's supposed alliance between these two countries, why don't we see that much involvement of China in this war?
Yeah, the relationship between Russia and China is a really interesting one. Obviously, just before Russia went to war, they announced this no limits partnership. And then we quickly found out that there's actually a lot of limits to this partnership. And my view of China's involvement in Russia's war against Ukraine is obviously they've given Russia some things, as you mentioned, but it really hasn't been much at all, like compared to what China could give to Russia. And so it seems like China has been doing the bare minimum to show some kind of support for Russia without getting too deeply involved. And there's quite a few reasons why this might be the case. One of the most interesting theories is that China actually kind of wants Russia to weaken itself, and they can't just give Russia nothing if that's what they want, because that would be too obvious. But if they give Russia a little bit and make it look like they're kind of on their side, but not enough to actually change things for them, it could actually cause Russia to hurt themselves more. Russia and China, of course, they have a really long history. These are countries that have exchanged fire in small disputes that could be categorized as small-scale warfare during the Soviet era. Over certain territories in the Far East, and in particular certain islands and rivers on their borders. And these islands have come up as disputes again after Russia invaded Ukraine. China claimed some islands that were split between Russia and China. China fully claimed these islands as their own, and Russia really wasn't able to do anything about it. They weren't even able to really talk about it because you could tell they kind of didn't want to bring attention to the issue. So it seems like China, there's a potential that China is kind of making moves against Russia in the Far East, or at least that's a potential outcome that's on their radar. And that's why they're not helping Russia nearly as much as they could. For example, when Russia lost the European market for their energy sales, China is the most obvious market that they could turn to make up most, if not all, of that revenue, because China has a huge population and they import almost all of their energy. And yet, despite this, as Russia has tried to build like new pipelines to deliver more energy to China, China has basically said, no, we're not really interested in those projects, and really has been playing hardball to try to get extremely low prices from Russia as the only way that they would agree to this sort of thing. So the idea that China is like super supportive of Russia, I don't know about like recent headlines, if that's just another play on this, but it's certainly not something that proves out to be true over the course of the war up to this point. And so I wouldn't be surprised if at some point China wants to betray Russia to get concessions from them, or even a military advantage over them.
I did hear about China wanting Russia to weaken itself in this war. So whenever you said, I was like that's literally what I in some way support as well, because I mean that is how these supposed alliances work. Whenever they are just thinking about betraying each other, that's how dictators think. You just are friends with somebody as long as there are advantages, as long as there is support you need, and as soon there is no more support, as soon as there is no more benefits from this friendship, betrayals start to happen and things like this. And so do you think still, I mean, there is still some kind of alliance, right? Do you think Putin still kind of asks behind the scenes for Chinese support, that we need more guys of your support, but then he gets refused and he just simply cannot do anything about it because China is too big of a partner, too big of an ally? And if Russia loses China as a partner, this will give a green light to America, to Ukraine, to all the Ukrainian allies to just push, because Russia could be at its weakest point.
Yeah, I would be surprised if Putin wasn't asking China for more support, right? Obviously, he's going to ask for that. At the same time, we know that there's a dynamic in Russia where Russian leadership is actively afraid of China. This has come out in a number of things. There's been reports that have been leaked out of the Kremlin that they're worried about China kind of looking at their back door. There's also, very well-known Russian wargaming for a potential Chinese invasion of the Far East that would happen exactly for this scenario where Russia is caught up in a war in the West and they can't do anything about it. And so for these reasons, I don't think Russia actually really would want their military to be too tightly integrated with the Chinese military, because I don't think they want to share a whole lot of information or a whole lot of intelligence with China that could give them an advantage for something like that. And that's very different from Ukraine with its Western partners. For example, Ukraine will share all the information they can get with their Western partners because they see them as true allies. But when it comes to countries like China and Russia, these types of countries, there's really no alliances. There's only interests, as you said. And so, yeah, Putin will take what he can get from China, but at the same time, he might not be too upset that China isn't getting too deeply integrated in Russia's military processes and things like that.
Well, it does look this way, at least at this moment, because, yeah, majority of news we are hearing right now about Russian-Ukrainian war or Russia in general, both in Russian sources and Western sources. And I would even say specifically in Russian sources, there's almost nothing anymore about Russia's partners, be it once again Belarus, China, India, or anything like this. It is just war as usual, daily updates, maybe some crazy stuff like they want to put some extra taxes on Western type of foods like burgers, sushi, pizza. I don't know if you heard about this. They want to put extra taxes on this kind of food because it destroys the family values of a traditional Russian family back in Russia. This is how ridiculous it gets. But yeah, I'm gonna make a video about it. By the time this podcast is uploaded, it should be already on my channel. Awesome. Speaking about that now, Russia and Ukraine specifically, let's now switch our attention because I guess that is the major focus of both of our channels right here, right now. I also did see one of your videos. I think it was also on Icarus Project YouTube channel about the Crimean Peninsula. Mm-hmm. Do you think Ukraine will ever be able to get back this peninsula before war, during war, after war? I mean, anytime.
Yeah, it's certainly not impossible. Crimea is not an impenetrable target. It's just a high cost target. And so it's not something that I see Ukraine taking in the short term because that wouldn't match their current strategy trying to defeat Russia in a war of attrition. Ukraine is really benefiting right now from being the country on the defensive with, heavy movements of Russian soldiers coming into their positions. And that is how Ukraine will ultimately defeat Russia when they hold their defensive positions long enough that Russia just cannot send, whether it's men or equipment or both, in sufficient numbers. And that opens up advantages for Ukraine. When the battlefield scenario changes to that kind of a situation where Russia is either kind of surrendering, kind of like Germany did in World War I, or just Russian soldiers are terrified of their job and more willing to abandon their positions, then the question of Crimea will be a completely different question because the way that it's fortified right now, that will be completely different. The way that Russia can support its defense, that will be completely different. And so in the long term, yeah, it's a very tenable objective. But again, it will never come at a low cost. In the short term, it's probably not where Ukraine is focusing their attention.
So do you think that is taking Crimea back? Because obviously all of us, we hope Ukrainians will be able to get it back. I mean, it's their own land. Mm-hmm. So do you think taking Crimea back for Ukrainians, is it going to be more like a moral victory? Because we took back the most precious part of Ukraine that Putin has since 2014, the most prized possession that he ever has over Ukraine. So taking back Crimea is that's it. There is nothing else that Putin has over us. Yep. Or do Ukrainians really need this peninsula logistically, strategically to open new trading routes in the Black Sea? What do you think is going to be more like a moral victory or actual physical demanded needed victory?
Yeah, I see it more as a moral victory, kind of the final conclusion to the war. The Crimean Peninsula does have some strategic significance, but that seems to be a lot less after this war has happened. We've seen the Russian Black Sea Fleet in and around the Crimean Peninsula being completely devastated by Ukraine. They don't even have a navy, just using drones and things like that. So the idea that you need the Crimean Peninsula to control naval access in the Black Sea, that's shown to not be true anymore to the level that it once was. Crimea would be nice for Ukraine to control because it would, as you said, open more trading routes. But as it is currently, Ukraine is able to protect trading routes within the Black Sea, despite the fact that Russia currently controls Crimea. And so, again, that's another reason why I don't think Ukraine would go after Crimea in the short term, because it's a high cost target that for the short term doesn't have a whole lot of strategic value. That said, if Ukraine ever gets it back, which I think they can, that will not be valueless. It will have some strategic value and it will open certain things up for them.
Yeah, I agree that this is not until for them in the short-term goals or anything like this because, yeah, unfortunately for them, they are just struggling as it is right now. But I 100% see this as the happiest ending of them all. In case Ukraine wins, this is going to be the final battle for Crimea. The full peninsula is liberated, and that's it. That's going to be the most awaited, the most hopefully expected, the most logical conclusion of this war. So let's hope it happens. And in case it does, happen, happen? What do you think? How will this affect, if Putin is still alive at that time, how will this affect the regime of Putin and his perception of Putin as a persona in front of Russians? Because he was like, Russia, Crimea is a historically Russian land. It's our land. They've been holding this for 11 years already. And now Russia lost Crimea, lost war, lost everything. How will this affect the regime of Putin?
Yeah, it'll be a huge blow. I don't know if they'll still be around if that happens, because, as I say, if when it happens, it's probably a disintegration of the front line and every other aspect. But for Putin, Crimea, as you say, it's an incredibly emotional target. I think there's a good reason that it was his first target. Crimea is where Vladimir Putin used to vacation all the time, and maybe he still does now that Russia took it back. As a child and also as a young man. And people might think that doesn't seem very important, but when you think of, like, if you have a spot that you always vacationed as a kid, that actually has a whole lot of emotional weight. And so for that reason, it would be a huge blow to Putin if Russia lost Crimea, also because it was where this war started. If Ukraine finally got that back after what's it been, 11 years at this point, maybe more, that would be huge. And as you say, it would be the final blow to kind of the Russian narrative and the Russian propaganda. It was hugely popular for Putin when he captured Crimea. And if you were ever to lose something like that, you probably know better than me. You're you're the Russian dude, but I would think that would break a lot of the mythos that Putin has built up around himself over the years.
Yeah, personally, I do see this as like a final collapse. Once again, if he's still there, people finally start opening their eyes. We lost everything. And then like, wait a second, did we even actually lose it? Or was it never ours in the first place? I think these are the questions that are going to immediately appear in people's eyes, because it's going to be, he's just going to that's it, it's going to be full chaos inside Kremlin at that point. Let's hope, I guess, we're going to see the logical conclusion, the happy ending of this war within our nearest future. Yes. I would say. And then speaking about the conclusion of the war, just being as realistic as possible. Like, I know we are both more pro-Ukrainian, obviously, but just as realistic as possible. If nothing changes significantly, if everything goes more or less as it is going right now, who do you think is going to win the war?
Well, especially given the announcements of this past week, I still hold that realistically Ukraine's going to win. The war is a war of attrition, and so it's ultimately not decided by who takes the most territory in the shortest period of time, but rather it's decided by the cost of the war. And obviously Russia thinks they can win a war of attrition because they're a much larger country than Ukraine. And so they think that over the long term, they can field more men and more resources than Ukraine can. But Ukraine, on the other hand, thinks that it can win a war of attrition, despite the fact that they're smaller, because they have Western support, and also because they have more limited resources that causes them to use what they do have a lot more strategically. We already see Ukraine, for example, really making advances in drone warfare that Russia obviously is trying to do, but they're way behind, where Ukraine is already having fully autonomous assaults on Russian positions, where they're actually taking entire Russian positions and capturing Russian soldiers using nothing but drones, so not even using Ukrainian lives. And so that kind of levels the manpower advantage over the long term. And it's getting to the point where it's going to take less and less Ukrainian lives to defend their land, and on the flip side, more and more Russian lives to achieve the objectives that they have. And so as long as Ukraine can continue to marshal enough support from its Western partners, I really don't think they can actually lose a war of attrition against Russia. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but it will be simple math. And that seems to be the direction the world is heading now. Recently, we had Europe announce these huge military budget advancements. And the only real open question on that was, well, can this actually be used to help Ukraine? Because Europe, they don't have the actual industrial capacity to build a lot of weapons in the short term. A lot of the weapons Ukraine needs are developed by the United States. But we now see the United States getting in a position where they're more fully behind Ukraine than they've ever been since Trump took office. I made an entire video analyzing that yesterday and why I think that will stick for the long term. That's not just wishful thinking. There's a lot of reasons behind it. And so what we see for Ukraine is their situation is progressively getting better and better and better and better and better, while Russia's situation is getting worse and worse and worse and worse and more desperate. And so if nothing changes as it currently exists today, we see who has the advantage, and that's Ukraine.
I did enjoy the way that you said that Ukraine popularized pretty much, let's call it like this, the drone warfare, because I think this was unexpected thing that Russian military did not expect at all, because they invaded Ukraine, tried to take it in 3 days. They used the conventional methods, the very same meat assaults I know they've been using back in the Second World War, Afghanistan, Chechen War, nothing pretty much changed. And then Ukrainians were so fast to pick up on the drone warfare, because at first it was almost just Ukrainian drone footage targeting Russian, I don't know, like soldiers, trenches, bunkers, all this kind of stuff. And then it was Russia who actually caught up and also started using drones, Iranian Shaheeds and everything. So it is Ukraine that is pushing the boundaries, the limits of the modern warfare, develops some new stuff, develops new strategies, and it is Russia which has to adapt. So this thing that you said, it's like literally makes so much sense why Ukraine is holding on and why Ukraine has a very, very good chance at winning. They just need a little bit more support, I would say, from the Western partners. And yes, like I warned you, I guess, before we started recording, there will be a small question, small answer in the very end, the very same question I ask everyone, and goes as following. If you're in front of Putin, what will you tell him?
Oh. Well, I'm a pastor, right? I told you that at the beginning, so I'd probably tell him to repent and judgment's coming, man.
No, that's it. There you go. Short and concise, like it needs to be. And that's it. Thanks so much, Paul Warburg. Thanks so much for appearing. Guys, to us, Thank God It's Monday podcast. I will leave all the links both to your channels, Paul Warburg and the Icarus Project, down below in the comments and in the description. If you want to check him out, definitely do. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
Thanks so much. Happy to be on.